They didn't realize when it began. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden shift in the room, no loud command that forced anyone to listen. Just a voice, calm, measured, certain. At first, people only watched. Some leaned back with crossed arms. Some listened with quiet curiosity. A few felt something they couldn't explain, a faint tension, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Nothing looked dangerous. That was the first sign. Because real influence rarely arrives looking dangerous. It arrives looking calm. The voice spoke slowly, choosing words that felt simple and clear. No confusion, no hesitation. And certainty has a strange effect on the human mind. It lowers resistance before the brain even realizes what is happening. People didn't agree immediately. Some exchanged brief glances. Some looked down, thinking, but the voice continued. The same idea returned again and again. Not louder, just familiar. And familiarity changes the way the brain listens. The first time you hear something, you analyze it. The second time, you compare it. But after many repetitions, something inside you relaxes. You stop guarding every sentence. You stop measuring every word. And slowly, listening turns into absorbing. No one stood up to say, "This feels wrong," not because everyone believed, but because nothing felt urgent enough to challenge. Influence does not always silence people. Sometimes it simply makes silence feel easier, and silence spreads quietly. One person remains quiet, then another, and soon the entire room feels still. The absence of resistance begins to feel like agreement. Somewhere near the back, someone felt a small unease, a quiet pressure behind the ribs, a thought that didn't fully form. Why does this feel easy? But ease feels comforting, and comfort rarely triggers alarm, so the thought faded before it could grow. The voice continued, clear, steady, certain. Certainty removes friction. When a message sounds sure of itself, the brain relaxes its grip on doubt. Not because it has been convinced, because uncertainty feels heavy and certainty feels light. Humans are not built to live in constant tension. The brain searches for stability the way lungs search for air. And when a confident message offers that stability, the mind leans toward it instinctively. No one decides to follow in a single moment. Following begins with tiny adjustments. A nod that lasts half a second longer. A thought that feels less urgent to question. A quiet decision to keep listening instead of stepping away. These changes are small enough to go unnoticed, and that is what makes them powerful. The room began to feel different. Not louder, not more intense, just aligned. People shifted in their seats at the same moments. Eyes moved toward the speaker at the same time. It wasn't coordination, it was atmosphere. Humans are deeply sensitive to atmosphere. We read emotional signals from the people around us before we fully process the words we hear. If others look calm, the brain assumes safety. If others stay still, the brain assumes agreement. And slowly, the environment itself begins to shape belief. The voice never demanded obedience. It didn't need to, because certainty can guide behavior without ever sounding forceful. A confident tone feels like leadership. A steady rhythm feels like control. And control feels safe in a world that often feels unpredictable. Safety lowers defenses. Lower defenses allow ideas to move deeper, and deeper ideas are harder to question. At some point, listening changed. No one could say exactly when. There was no clear boundary between curiosity and acceptance. Just a gradual shift. People leaned forward instead of leaning back. Eyes stayed longer. Breathing slowed. The room felt quieter, not because fewer words were spoken, but because fewer doubts were held. And that is the moment influence becomes invisible, when nothing feels urgent enough to resist. Most people imagine influence as something obvious, a dramatic speech, a powerful command. But the strongest influence feels gentle. It feels reasonable. It feels like someone removing confusion from your mind, and relief is powerful. Relief tells the brain, you don't need to fight this, so the brain stops fighting. By now, the voice felt familiar, not just a sound, a presence. And familiarity carries trust long before trust is consciously given. The brain prefers what it recognizes. What it has heard before feels less threatening. And when threat disappears, questioning slows down. No one noticed when observation became agreement. No one noticed when agreement began to feel natural, because nothing felt forced. Everything felt calm, safe, expected. If someone had entered the room at that moment, they might have seen nothing unusual. People listening quietly, a speaker talking steadily. No signs of pressure, no signs of conflict. But inside the mind, something deeper was changing. Doubt was growing tired. Questions felt heavier to carry, and certainty felt easier. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the shift was already complete. They were no longer just listening. They were moving in the same direction. Not because they were weak, not because they were careless, because certainty feels like relief to the human brain. And relief is difficult to resist. The human brain is not designed to remain uncertain for long. Uncertainty feels like standing on unstable ground. It forces the mind to stay alert, to analyze, to question every signal. And questioning requires energy. So the brain searches constantly for something that feels stable enough to trust. Not necessarily something that is true, just something that feels certain. At the beginning, people listened carefully. They measured each word against their own thoughts. Some compared the message to things they had learned before. Others waited for proof that never fully arrived, but something subtle began to change. The voice remained steady. No hesitation, no visible doubt. And confidence sends a powerful signal to the nervous system. It tells the brain that someone else has already done the thinking, that the uncertainty has already been solved. So the mind begins to relax its guard. Not immediately, gradually, almost politely. A few listeners felt a small resistance at first. A quiet thought that whispered, slow down. Something feels incomplete, but resistance is difficult to maintain alone. Humans are social observers. We look to others to understand how we should feel. When no one else reacts, doubt begins to feel like a personal error. Eyes move around the room. No raised voices. No visible concern. Just stillness. And stillness tells the brain, this must be safe. Familiarity began to build quietly. The same ideas returned in slightly different words. The same tone carried through every sentence. Nothing new appeared, but everything began to feel known. And the brain treats what is known differently from what is new. New ideas trigger caution. Familiar ideas trigger comfort. Comfort lowers mental effort. And when effort drops, acceptance grows. One listener leaned forward slightly, not out of full belief, but because the message felt easier to follow than before. Another stopped comparing the words to their own memories. It felt unnecessary. The voice sounded certain enough. And certainty creates an illusion of clarity. When something sounds clear, the brain assumes it must be well understood, even when the understanding is only surface deep. This is the moment most people never notice. The moment when analysis quietly fades into observation. Questions become softer. Thoughts become shorter. The mind shifts from "is this correct?" to "where is this going?" And that small shift changes everything. Because once the brain stops testing ideas, it begins absorbing them. Someone near the edge of the room crossed their arms tighter. They felt a flicker of discomfort. Not strong enough to interrupt, just enough to exist. But discomfort without confirmation feels unstable. So the mind searches for reassurance. And reassurance is found in the calm faces of others. If everyone else seems relaxed, maybe the discomfort isn't important. Maybe it will pass. So the person remains quiet. And silence strengthens the atmosphere. Confidence has a way of reshaping perception. A voice that never hesitates feels reliable. A steady rhythm feels prepared. The brain interprets these signals before it examines the content itself. Because the human mind evolved to read tone faster than facts, tone tells us who is safe. Tone tells us who leads. And leadership reduces the burden of decision-making. Gradually, listeners began to feel lighter. Not because they understood more, because they felt less pressure to decide. The voice carried direction. Direction reduces chaos. And reducing chaos feels like relief. Relief spreads through the nervous system like warmth. Muscles loosen. Breathing slows. And when the body relaxes, the mind becomes more receptive. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet trade was happening. The brain was exchanging independence for stability. Not intentionally. Not consciously. Just subtly. It chose the path that required less resistance. Because resistance demands energy. And energy is something the brain tries to conserve. The message didn't need to prove itself. It only needed to remain consistent. Consistency creates the illusion of reliability. When something stays the same, the brain begins to treat it as dependable. Even without evidence. Even without verification. Dependability feels safe, and safety reduces the need for doubt. At this point, the atmosphere felt different from the beginning. The room seemed quieter, but more focused. Listeners were no longer measuring each sentence. They were moving with it, following the rhythm, letting the message carry them forward. And following does not feel like surrender when it happens slowly. It feels like alignment. One person shifted slightly in their chair, as if waking from a long thought. They tried to recall what had felt uncertain earlier, but the memory of doubt had already softened. Because familiarity rewrites emotional responses. What once felt questionable now felt neutral. And neutrality is often mistaken for acceptance. The voice paused briefly. A silence filled the space. But instead of tension, the silence felt comfortable. No one rushed to fill it with questions. No one challenged the direction. The absence of challenge became part of the message itself. And when silence supports a voice, that voice begins to feel unquestionable. This is the first crack in independent thinking. Not a collapse, just a small shift. A moment where certainty becomes more attractive than exploration. Where clarity feels more valuable than truth. And once that preference forms, it strengthens itself. Every calm reaction reinforces the next calm reaction. Every quiet listener makes the next listener quieter, until the entire environment begins to shape belief without anyone realizing it. The unsettling part is this: no one feels controlled, no one feels forced, because the strongest influence does not push. It guides, it removes friction. It offers relief from the exhausting work of doubt. And relief is powerful enough to change direction without ever raising its voice. Have you ever walked into a library and just known to be quiet without anyone saying a word? Or stood in line at a grocery store, automatically queuing up behind the person in front of you? These are perfect examples of something powerful at play in our daily lives: unspoken agreements. These are the invisible rules, the social contracts we all follow without ever really talking about them. They're the silent handshakes that guide our interactions and shape our communities. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of these unwritten rules, exploring how they work, why they're so important, and what happens when they break down. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll see your world in a completely new light. So, what exactly are these unspoken agreements? At their core, they are shared expectations about behavior within a group or society. They aren't laws written in a book or rules posted on a sign. Instead, they're learned through observation, experience, and just being part of a culture. Think about something as simple as personal space. In some cultures, standing very close to someone while you talk is normal and friendly. In others, it might feel invasive or uncomfortable. There's no global manual for this. It's an unspoken agreement specific to that place. The same goes for making eye contact, how we greet each other, or even how loudly we talk on public transport. These agreements create a sense of order and predictability. They're like the social glue that holds us all together, making our complex world a little easier to navigate. Without them, every single interaction would be a negotiation, a constant state of uncertainty. The fascinating thing is how we learn them. It starts when we're kids. We watch our parents, our teachers, our friends. We see someone hold a door open for the person behind them, and we learn that's a kind thing to do. We see people on a bus give up their seat for an elderly person, and we absorb that as a social norm. It's a process of social conditioning. We get positive feedback, like a smile or a thank you, when we follow the rules. And we get negative feedback, maybe a frown or an awkward silence, when we break them. This constant stream of subtle cues reinforces these behaviors until they become second nature. It's like learning a language without ever opening a textbook. You just pick it up by being immersed in it. These agreements become so ingrained that we often don't even realize we're following them until someone violates one. Let's consider a few more examples to really see their power. Think about the workplace. There's an unspoken agreement about not microwaving fish in the office kitchen, right? Nobody puts it in the employee handbook, but everyone who's ever smelled it knows it's a major faux pas. Or what about the agreement to mute yourself on a large video call unless you read the one speaking? It's not a law, but it's essential for a smooth and productive meeting. These little things build a culture of respect and consideration. They show that we are part of a team, that we are aware of how our actions affect others. This shared understanding reduces friction and allows us to focus on the bigger goals, whether it's finishing a project or just having a pleasant lunch break. The power of these agreements extends far beyond just being polite. They form the very foundation of trust in our relationships. When you lend a friend a book, there's an unspoken agreement that they'll return it in good condition. When you share a secret with someone, there's an agreement of confidentiality. These pacts aren't written down, but their violation can cause deep hurt and damage the relationship, sometimes irreparably. This is because breaking an unspoken agreement is more than just breaking a rule. It's a betrayal of shared understanding and mutual respect. It signals that the other person doesn't value the relationship or the social fabric that underpins it. Rebuilding that trust can be a long and difficult process, all because a silent promise was broken. But what happens when these unspoken agreements start to fray or disappear? We see the results all around us. Think about online comment sections. In the early days of the internet, there was a sort of unspoken agreement of civil discourse, often called netiquette. But as platforms grew and anonymity became more common, those agreements eroded. The result? Trolling, flame wars, and a general decline in the quality of conversation. The lack of face-to-face interaction removes the subtle social cues, the frowns, the hurt looks that normally keep our behavior in check. Without those feedback mechanisms, the unspoken rules fall apart and a digital free-for-all can ensue. This shows just how fragile these agreements can be and how crucial they are for maintaining a positive and constructive environment, both online and off. It's also important to recognize that not all unspoken agreements are good. Some can perpetuate negative stereotypes, exclusion, and inequality. For example, in some old-fashioned corporate cultures, there might be an unspoken agreement that only certain types of people get promoted, or that it's not okay to talk about mental health struggles. These toxic agreements can stifle innovation, hurt morale, and create an unfair environment. The key here is to become conscious of the unspoken rules we are participating in. We need to ask ourselves, does this agreement serve a positive purpose? Does it promote fairness, respect, and inclusion? Or does it create barriers and hold people back? Challenging and changing these negative agreements is one of the most powerful ways we can drive positive social change. It starts with one person being brave enough to speak up and question the silent status quo. So how can we harness the power of unspoken agreements for good? It starts with awareness. Pay attention to the unwritten rules in your own life, at home, at work, with friends. Acknowledge them. Appreciate the ones that create harmony and connection. For instance, when you see a stranger pick up a piece of trash, you're witnessing a positive unspoken agreement in action, the shared responsibility for our public spaces. By consciously participating in and modeling these positive behaviors, we strengthen them. When you hold the door, let someone merge in traffic, or simply listen patiently while someone else is talking, you're casting a vote for a more considerate and cooperative world. Your small actions ripple outwards, reinforcing the social fabric for everyone. And when you encounter a negative unspoken agreement, don't be afraid to challenge it thoughtfully. You don't have to start a huge confrontation. It can be as simple as asking, "Why do we do it this way?" or modeling a new, better behavior. For example, if there's an unspoken rule at work not to leave before the boss, but you finished your work, leaving on time can subtly challenge that norm and encourage a healthier work-life balance for everyone. By being the change, you give others permission to change too. This is how cultures evolve. It's not always through grand gestures, but often through the quiet courage of individuals who decide to rewrite the unwritten rules. Ultimately, unspoken agreements are a testament to our incredible capacity as humans to cooperate and coexist. They are the invisible architecture of our social world, quietly guiding our actions and shaping our experiences. They allow for flow, reduce conflict, and build trust. While some may be outdated or harmful, our ability to recognize, question, and reshape them is what allows our societies to grow and improve. So the next time you find yourself instinctively lowering your voice in a quiet place or waiting your turn in line, take a moment to appreciate the silent, powerful force at work. You're participating in a beautiful, complex human dance. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today. If you found this interesting, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the way our world works. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What is an unspoken agreement that you find fascinating or frustrating in your own life? Let's talk about it. At first, it was only agreement, a few shared ideas, a few repeated phrases, nothing permanent, nothing final, just words. But the human mind rarely leaves ideas as just words, because once a thought is repeated enough, it begins to feel familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for truth. People didn't notice the shift immediately. There was no sudden moment, no loud announcement saying, "You are changing now." It happened quietly. Someone began using the same language. Someone else started defending the message in conversations. A few even corrected outsiders, without realizing when they had crossed that invisible line, because belief is rarely forced. It is absorbed. The brain loves consistency. When actions and thoughts align, it rewards the person with a sense of stability, but when they don't, tension appears. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, that subtle discomfort when your behavior and your doubts no longer match. And the easiest way to remove that discomfort is not to change behavior. It is to change belief. So slowly, quietly, the mind begins to adjust its own story. Maybe this makes sense. Maybe I misunderstood before. Maybe this is the right direction. Not because someone forced them to think it, but because the brain seeks emotional balance more than logical perfection. And once belief moves from the outside to the inside, something powerful happens. Identity begins to form. People stop saying, "I agree with this idea." They started saying, "This is who I am." And identity is not just a thought, it is a shield. When an idea becomes part of identity, Criticism no longer feels like a discussion. It feels like an attack. That is the moment when conversations change. Questions feel heavier. Opposition feels personal. And the brain shifts from curiosity to protection. Because protecting identity feels like protecting survival. You could see it in their posture, in their tone, in the way they responded to outsiders with calm certainty, not aggressive, not defensive, just unshakably sure. And certainty is contagious. When someone speaks without hesitation, the listener's brain mirrors that confidence. It reduces doubt. Even without evidence, this is not weakness. It is design. Humans evolved to trust signals of confidence. In uncertain environments, following a decisive voice once meant safety. But in modern spaces, that same instinct can be redirected. The more they repeated the ideas, the more the ideas began to repeat them. Daily routines changed, language shifted. Even humor started to reflect the message. And something subtle happened inside the group. Belonging grew stronger than questioning. Because belonging releases warmth in the brain. It quiets loneliness. It replaces uncertainty with shared direction. And once belonging is felt deeply, the cost of doubt becomes heavier. To question the idea now felt like questioning the people beside them. And the human mind avoids social pain whenever possible. So doubt didn't disappear, it just changed shape. It became quieter, more private, less visible. Not because people stopped thinking, but because thinking alone feels colder than agreeing together. And that is the moment when belief stops being a decision and becomes a home. Inside that home, everything feels consistent. Stories reinforce each other. Voices echo the same certainty. Even silence begins to sound like agreement. But identity has another effect. It filters perception. New information is no longer received neutrally. The brain asks a silent question before accepting anything. Does this support who I am, or threaten it? If it supports, it feels true instantly. If it threatens, it feels wrong before logic even begins. And slowly, without anyone noticing, the world outside starts to look more distant, not hostile, just unfamiliar. Because identity creates an invisible border between us and them. And once that border exists, every interaction carries emotional weight. Inside the group, there is warmth, understanding, shared language. Outside, there is uncertainty again. And humans rarely walk back toward uncertainty willingly. So belief grows roots. Not deep because it is proven, but deep because it is lived. And lived experiences feel stronger than arguments. That is why even gentle questions from outsiders begin to feel exhausting, not threatening, just tiring. Because every challenge forces the brain to revisit that whole discomfort, the tension between doubt and belonging. And the brain remembers how hard that tension felt before. So it chooses the easier path. It chooses alignment. Alignment with the group. Alignment with the message. Alignment with the identity that now feels safe. From the outside, nothing dramatic has happened. No loud speeches, no visible pressure. Just people standing together, speaking calmly, moving forward with quiet certainty. But internally, the transformation is profound. What began as curiosity has become commitment, and commitment feels peaceful. It removes the exhausting need to question every step. It replaces confusion with direction. But peace can sometimes hide a deeper shift. Because when identity locks into belief, change no longer feels like growth. It feels like loss. And humans will defend against loss, even when they don't realize what they are protecting. So the descent continues, not with fear, not with force, but with comfort. A comfort so gentle, so emotionally rewarding, that few people stopped to ask when the idea stopped being something they followed and started becoming something they were. Pause, slow breath. And by the time someone notices the difference, turning back no longer feels like a simple choice. It feels like leaving a part of themselves behind. There is a moment in every psychological journey when movement stops feeling like a choice. Not because anyone is trapped, not because doors are closed, but because turning around suddenly feels heavier than continuing forward. At this stage, nothing looks extreme from the outside. People still laugh. They still speak calmly. They still believe they are thinking clearly. And that is what makes this moment so powerful. Because the shift is no longer visible in actions. It lives inside perception. The brain has begun to build a new reality, one shaped by repetition, belonging, and emotional safety. Every shared experience strengthens the same pathway. Every agreement feels like proof. Every nod from another person whispers a silent message. You are in the right place, and the human nervous system relaxes when it feels aligned. Heart rate slows, shoulders drop. Thoughts become smoother. Safety is not just an idea. It is a physical sensation. So when a conflicting voice finally appears, it does not feel like information. It feels like disruption, not loud, not aggressive, just uncomfortable. And discomfort is something the brain naturally avoids. At first, the reaction is subtle, a quick rationalization, a small mental adjustment. They just don't understand. They haven't experienced what we have. Simple explanations that protect emotional stability. Because once belief becomes identity, contradiction feels like chaos. And the mind is always trying to reduce chaos. This is the stage where people begin to filter reality without realizing it. Not intentionally, not maliciously, automatically. Information that aligns feels clear and intelligent. Information that challenges feels confusing or flawed. The brain isn't lying. It is protecting coherence, the internal story that now holds everything together. And coherence feels like peace. Inside the group, conversations become smoother. Everyone speaks the same emotional language. Jokes land easily. Silences feel comfortable instead of awkward. There is a rhythm now. A shared understanding that doesn't need to be explained, and humans crave rhythm. Because rhythm reduces uncertainty, but outside voices still exist. Questions still appear. Reality does not stop moving just because a group feels stable. So the brain begins to create distance, not physical distance. Psychological distance. Outsiders seem less relatable. Their concerns feel exaggerated. Their doubts sound repetitive. Not because they are wrong, but because they no longer match the internal world that has been built. And slowly, a quiet wall forms. No one announces it. No one designs it. It grows naturally from shared certainty. Inside the wall, everything feels clear. Outside, everything feels noisy. This is where the point of no return begins to take shape. Not as a dramatic line in the sand, but as a gradual narrowing of perspective. Choices that once felt open now feel obvious. Alternative paths seem less appealing. And the brain interprets this clarity as growth. But clarity and closure can look very similar from the inside, because once emotional investment becomes deep, leaving would mean questioning months of belief, hours of conversations, moments of connection that felt real and meaningful. And the human mind resists anything that suggests those moments might have been misplaced. Psychologists call this the sunk cost effect, the tendency to continue something simply because so much has already been invested. But inside the experience, it doesn't feel like a bias. It feels like loyalty. Loyalty to the people who listened. Loyalty to the version of yourself that found comfort here. And loyalty is one of the strongest emotional forces in human behavior. So even when small doubts return, they arrive quietly, late at night, in brief pauses between conversations. A question flickers, then fades. Because questioning now feels lonely. And loneliness carries a heavier emotional weight than uncertainty. The brain measures risk not just by logic, but by social connection. To step back would mean stepping away from the warmth that has been built, so most people don't step back. They lean forward, not dramatically, just enough to feel aligned again, and the group moves together with calm confidence, with steady voices, with the comforting sense that everything finally makes sense. From the outside, observers might ask, why don't they just question more? But that question misses the deeper truth, because from the inside, there is no obvious danger, only stability, only belonging, only a clear direction that feels easier than uncertainty. And humans rarely abandon what feels emotionally safe. Even when they once promised themselves they would stay objective, the point of no return is not a single decision. It is a feeling, a quiet realization that going back would require rebuilding identity from the ground up. And rebuilding identity is one of the most psychologically exhausting things a person can do. So the journey continues, not with fear, not with pressure, but with momentum. Momentum built from shared belief, repeated experiences, and the deep human need to belong to something larger than ourselves. Slow pause, softer tone, and somewhere beneath the calm surface, a question still exists. Not loud enough to stop the movement, not strong enough to break the rhythm. Just a faint echo asking, is this certainty, clarity, or is it comfort? Because the most powerful turning points in human psychology are rarely marked by noise. They arrive quietly, wrapped in confidence, hidden inside the feeling that there is no longer a reason to look back. Have you ever felt a tiny crack in the foundation of everything you thought you knew? It doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a whisper, a question so small you almost miss it. Maybe it's a comment from a friend that doesn't quite sit right, or a story you read that presents a world completely different from your own. At first, you dismiss it. It's just a random thought, an outlier. Your world is solid, your beliefs are secure. Why would you question them? You've built your life, your identity, your community around this system of thought. It's comfortable, it's safe, it's home. But the whisper doesn't go away. It lingers. That little piece of information, that alternate perspective, it plants a seed. You start noticing more things that don't quite fit. You see inconsistencies, things you'd previously glossed over without a second thought. It is like finding a single puzzle piece that doesn't belong to the picture you've been working on your whole life. You try to force it, to jam it into a space where it clearly doesn't fit, but it just won't go. And now, you can't unsee it. You start to wonder, what if there are more pieces like this? What if the picture on the box isn't the real picture at all? This is where the real tension begins. On one side, you have your tribe, your people. The ones who share your worldview, who speak your language. Belonging is a powerful human need. It feels good to be understood, to be part of something bigger than yourself. When you're with them, the world makes sense again. The doubts fade into the background and the comfort of certainty returns. They reinforce the old stories, the familiar narratives. They tell you, this is the way. Don't listen to those other voices. They're just trying to confuse you, and a part of you desperately wants to believe them. It would be so much easier to just stay. But on the other side, there's curiosity. A relentless pulling force that wants to know what lies beyond the walls you've built. That seed of doubt has sprouted, and it's growing into a tree of questions. What if there's truth in those other voices? What if the world is more complex, more nuanced than you've been led to believe? This curiosity feels dangerous. It feels like a betrayal. A betrayal of your community, your past, and even a part of yourself. You start living a double life. In public, you nod along, you say the right things, you play the part. But in private, late at night, you're secretly searching, reading, listening. You're exploring forbidden territories of thought, and with each new discovery, the walls of your old reality feel a little thinner. This is when the internal conflict really ramps up. It's no longer just an external debate. It becomes a war inside your own head. Two distinct voices emerge, each with its own compelling argument. One voice is the guardian of the old ways. It sounds like your parents, your teachers, your community leaders. It speaks of loyalty, tradition, and the dangers of straying from the path. It warns you of the chaos and loneliness that await you if you leave. It says, think of everything you'll lose. Your friends, your family, your sense of security. Is it worth it, just for a few questions that probably have no answers? This voice is rooted in fear, but also in love. It wants to protect you. The other voice is the seeker of truth. It's quieter, newer, but persistent. It speaks of authenticity, of integrity, of the deep human need to align your inner world with your outer experience. It asks, how can you keep pretending? How can you live a life that doesn't feel true to what you're discovering? Isn't a lonely truth better than a comfortable lie? This voice is fueled by a desire for congruence, for a life where you don't have to compartmentalize your own mind. The battle between these two narratives is exhausting. Some days the guardian wins. You shut down your computer, block the dissenting accounts, and vow to return to the fold. But then, a new piece of information finds its way in, and the seeker's voice grows louder once more. You feel like you're being torn in two. At some point, you realize you can't live in this state of perpetual conflict. The mental and emotional toll is too high. You arrive at a crossroads, a moment of choice. It's not a dramatic movie-like decision. It's often quiet, personal, and profoundly internal. The choice is simple, but not easy. Comfort or awareness? Do you choose to deliberately ignore the inconsistencies, to double down on the old system and find your peace in the familiar? This is the path of returning to the comfort of the tribe, of choosing belonging over your own burgeoning understanding. It's a valid choice, a way to end the internal war and find stability again. Many people take this path and find their own kind of peace there. Or do you choose awareness? Do you choose to follow the questions, wherever they may lead, even if it means dismantling the very foundation of your identity? This path means accepting that you might lose your community. It means embracing uncertainty and learning to live without easy answers. It means stepping out of the familiar cave and into the blinding, complicated sunlight. It's the path of choosing personal integrity over social comfort. It's a terrifying choice because it means admitting to yourself, I don't know. After a lifetime of feeling like you had all the answers, those 3 words are the heaviest you will ever speak. If you choose awareness, the final break isn't an earthquake. It's more like the quiet melting of ice. One day, you wake up and the old system no longer has its power over you. The fear is still there, but it's no longer in charge. The compelling emotional pull of the old narratives has faded. You can see them for what they are, stories. Stories that served you for a time, but which you have now outgrown. You look at the people still inside that system not with anger or judgment, but with a kind of gentle sadness and understanding. You were once there too. The world doesn't suddenly become simple or clear. In fact, it becomes infinitely more complex, more messy, and more beautiful. You start to see the shades of gray you were taught to ignore. You learn to hold multiple, even conflicting, ideas in your mind at the same time. You stop looking for a single unifying theory of everything and start appreciating the mystery. The fracture of your old psychological system doesn't leave you broken. It leaves you open. Open to new ideas, new experiences, new people, and most importantly, a new, more authentic version of yourself. When certainty begins to fade, silence returns. Not the heavy silence from before, the one filled with pressure and expectation. A different kind, quieter, more personal. For the first time in a long while, the mind is no longer reacting automatically. It observes. It listens. It breathes without waiting for direction. And this moment can feel strangely emotional, because awareness does not only reveal what was misleading, it also reveals how deeply the human need for belonging runs. No one enters a powerful narrative thinking they are losing themselves. They enter because something inside them feels understood. A voice that sounds confident, a message that promises clarity, a community that feels aligned. These things are not weaknesses. They are human instincts, the desire to connect, the desire to feel certain, the desire to reduce chaos in a complex world. So when distance begins to grow, the first emotion is rarely anger, it is grief. Grief for the comfort that once felt real. Grief for the version of certainty that made everything simpler. The brain struggles here, because letting go of an idea does not only change beliefs, it changes identity. Thought patterns begin to reorganize. Old assumptions lose their emotional weight. New questions appear without clear answers. And uncertainty returns, but this time it feels different. Before, uncertainty felt threatening. Now it feels open, like standing in a wide space after leaving a crowded room. There is relief, but also vulnerability. The mind asks, if I was influenced before, how do I trust myself again? This is where real psychological growth begins. Not by rejecting everything, not by replacing one certainty with another, but by learning to sit with complexity. Because the strongest form of awareness is not loud confidence, it is calm observation. The observer begins to notice patterns everywhere, how repetition shapes perception, how tone influences trust, how the brain relaxes when a message sounds complete, even when evidence is incomplete, and slowly, something important changes. Authority no longer feels external. It becomes internal. The person stops asking, who sounds the most certain? And starts asking, what feels consistent with reality? This shift is subtle, but powerful. It does not make someone cold or distant. It makes them grounded. Because awareness does not remove emotion, it gives emotion direction. Now when a confident voice appears, the brain listens, but also pauses. When a crowd moves together, the body feels the pull, but also notices the momentum, not resistance. Just awareness, and awareness creates space. Space to think, space to question, space to choose. Many people believe psychological influence ends with a dramatic realization, but real change is quieter than that. It looks like someone listening more slowly, speaking less impulsively, observing more deeply. From the outside, nothing looks revolutionary, but internally, a different system has formed. One that values curiosity over certainty. One that sees confidence as a signal, not proof. One that understands how easily humans can be guided and how gently they can guide themselves back. And this is the paradox of human psychology. The same brain that can be influenced is also capable of reflection. The same emotional system that seeks belonging can learn to stand independently, not in isolation, but in awareness, because true independence is not the absence of influence. It is the ability to notice it. When the noise fades, what remains is not anger, not superiority, just clarity. A quiet understanding that influence is not always malicious. Sometimes it grows from conviction, sometimes from fear, sometimes from the deep human need to make the world feel certain. And recognizing this does not make someone cynical. It makes them compassionate. Compassionate toward others who are still searching for certainty. And compassionate toward the version of themselves that once needed it too. Because every psychological journey leaves something behind. Not just lessons about influence, but lessons about identity. About how easily perception can change. About how powerful a calm, observant mind can become. And maybe the greatest shift is this. The person no longer needs a loud voice to feel guided. They trust their own pace, their own questions, their own awareness. The world does not become simpler, but it becomes clearer. And clarity, quiet, steady clarity, is often stronger than any certainty that came before.
This was The Human File.